Hey, everybody. You know, now that we're past the whole Mecha Sally Death Egg Mark II World Tour 2 arc, and pretty much now we're in Death Egg Mark II World Tour 3 arc, aka the soon to be Sonic Unleashed adaptation, Vorak 295 2 days ago, and I didn't get a chance to say this, but 48 hours ago, came up with a topic. And again, I'll provide the link down below. But this topic he came up with is called the predictions that came true. Now, I know a lot of us pretty much called exactly what was going to happen in the comic when this all started, and indeed, a majority of us got it right. In fact, I could tell you one thing. Some people over at the SaturdayMorningSonic.com forums, one girl named Natty, as soon as she saw what Sally's redesign was going to look like, I can remember this clearly. She said basically, as soon as she saw it, she was like, B.W. Rosas, Brian, called it. And I did. I'm not trying to take credit for it, but I basically saw this. And being the longtime fan that I've been, being the reader of the comic for as long as I've been the reader of the comic, for being the fan of the Saturday morning show as long as I have been, altogether, I pretty much knew that with the popularity of this character, there was no way they were going to keep her roboticized. And I pretty much said she's going to get a redesign because of this. And I was right. I said she was going to get fully clothed because of this. And I was right. And again, I'm not trying to take credit for that, but I was among one of the first, if not one of the very first, to come out and point that out. But that's not just one of the predictions came true. According to Vorak295, and I'm sure a lot of you fans listening would agree with him, according to Vorak295, more than just that came true. According to Vorak295, he says this 48 hours ago. He says, and I quote, while Flynn was boring us, Ian Flynn was boring us all to the point of hatred over the past 3 years, we ended up taking a lot of guesses about the eventual outcome of the arcs and where things would go after the fact. And really, we've got a lot of them right. And, you can't blame Vorak 295 for saying that because, like I said, going back to what I just said, when Sally got roboticized, I basically specifically came out and I was one of the very first that said she's going to get fully clothed because of this. And I was right. Now, what he points out, he points out about 5 things that help actually not 5, but he actually points out 9 different things that pretty much confirmed that we, the fans, were spot on or just about spot on about our guesses. The first one he talks about is the retcon beams. He says basically in the first topic, he says the retcon beams gave Flynn too much power. And he says this, and I quote about the first one. He says, and I quote, when I started complaining about the G wave, the Genesis wave, I said it would be too much of an easy get out for Flynn. It would give him the ability to phase out any elements of continuity that he didn't like. I even used Robotnik Prime as an example of this. Lo and behold, Robotnik Prime is gone from the new world. However, it's likely that this was the fallout from the legal disputes. Now, at least Vorak295 and some fans do agree that the possibility of Robotnik Prime or SatAM Robotnik being gone from the comic could be part of the whole situation with Sega and Penders. But continuing on. But continuing on, he said the number 2 topic he brought up was, or the number 2 highlight he brought up was, Sally would be retconned into her new body rather than there being an actual fix. Okay, that's number 2. Number 2, like I said, like he points out, is Sally would be retconned into her new body rather than there being an actual fix. And this is what he says about it, and I quote, for the number 2 highlight, and I quote, once the Genesis wave was brought back in for Worlds Collide, this became easily predicted. Let's be honest, with the hokey nature of the alternative, it was unlikely to be anything else. It also got rid of the problems surrounding the weaponizing conveniently enough for Archie. Okay, he says, it also got rid of the problems surrounding the weaponizing conveniently enough for Archie. So basically, he's saying that when the Genesis wave, or the Super Genesis wave, was brought into Worlds Collide, that basically he, among a lot of fans, pretty much said, Sally's going to get her redesign because of that. It's not going to be because of the Krasud plant. It's not going to be because of that. It's going to be because of this damn Super Genesis wave that she's going to get her redesign. And and to them, that's exactly what happened. And he also points out that because of the fact that they, the fans, called it and said that Sally had been butchered, weaponized, gutted, and thus weaponized, that this would be an easy out for them to get her back to normal. And when one reads that, you can't really blame them, even though I still think she was not gutted. I think she's just had armor added on to her. All right. The number 3 highlight he has is the Mecha Sally arc would implode and have no real ending. In other words, pretty much we would not get a proper conclusion, a proper conclusion and epilogue to this story arc. And this is what he says about that, and I quote. This is what he says about the number 3 highlight, and I quote. We all saw that coming. The arc was basically Other M 2.0. And it was such a mess that we could see that it was either going to be an implosion or a DEM or something. So basically, like I said, they pretty much felt that they knew the Mecha Sally arc, or as he just called it, Other M 2.0, was not going to go anywhere, was not going to have any real significance, and that basically Ian Flynn had painted himself in a freaking corner. And I hate to say this, but I do kind of agree. I mean, we didn't really get a real ending, if you will. We sort of got an ending, but we didn't get any real, conclusion, real satisfaction, if you will. And again, this is what happens when you're a writer like Ian Flynn, and you paint yourself into a corner, especially when you're trying to create, as much as he hates this, and as much as Ian Flynn may not want to admit this, or anybody else may not want to admit this, as much as you try to create your masterpiece, your answer to Endgame. All right. The number 4 highlight he points out is Ian Flynn is more dedicated to memes and references than finishing his story. And this is what he says about the 4th highlight, and I quote, he chose defeating the Tails doll over curing Sally or ousting Naugus as the main plot for 252. Nuff said. Sally and Naugus had something interesting going on in their stories, and while Naugus had that possessing Jeffrey thing working against him, they could have brought him back to villain with good publicity status, without the dying part. Sally, do I even need to say it? Instead, Tails doll. So in other words, what Vorak 295 is saying is that, from his and other fans' point of views, Ian Flynn would rather choose a meme, in other words, the Tails doll, which has been a meme for quite some time, and choose its defeat, its destruction, over trying to cure Sally's roboticization or ousting Nagus as king. So take that for what it's worth, if you will. Number 5. This is what he says about, this is his 5th highlight in basically the predictions that came true. This is the 5th highlight from Vorak 295 that he points out. Ian Flynn recycling fans' ideas. In other words, basically he's saying that Ian Flynn is taking a lot of the fans' ideas and he's recycling them into his own. And this is what he says about that, and I quote. This is what he says, and I quote. Scourge carried the impression of this, basically being a walking ball of cliches from recolor fiction. And then we get Shadow Fall, which brings us a Shadow the Hedgehog sequel/adaptation with some new black arms that are unrelated to Black Doom for whatever reason, and an evil Shadow knockoff. Something that has been done plenty of times on fanfiction.net. In other words, what he's saying is Ian Flynn is taking stories like what's going on with the Sonic Universe story Shadows Fall, and he's taking stories like that have been seen and read on places like fanfiction.net and Sonic fan sites, and recycling it into his own. And here, Ian Flynn, in the eyes of some, or in the ears of some, said he would never steal fan ideas. No offense, Ian, but if what Vorak 295 is saying, you've done exactly that. Number 6. This is the 6th highlight that Vorak 295 points out. Number 6, the retcon was a blatant swerve to a more Sega-styled universe. In other words, he's saying that the soft retcon, soft reboot was more along the lines to take what was Mobius Prime and just make it into Sonic's world from the games. And this is what he says about it, and I quote, "Do I even need to explain this one? The planet doesn't even have a name anymore because Sega of Japan are morons." Excuse me. That's what Vorak 295 says. Number 7. This is the 7th highlight he points out. Sonic's jerkhole or a-hole behavior was conveniently glossed over. And this is what he says about that 7th highlight there. And I quote, hasn't been addressed, and Sonic gets off scot-free for being as interested in saving Sally as he is in Tupperware. In other words, what they're pointing out is the fact that Sonic was just being cool, calm, and collective, being himself, if you will, like in the games, when they were trying to save Sally, when she was Mecha Sally, is pathetic, and that all they did with this soft retcon was just gloss over it like it never happened. Alright, the 8th highlight. The 8th highlight he points out, and I quote, Number 8, there was no point in keeping the old universe. Yeah. Apparently, well, let's see what he has to say. This is what he says about that 8th highlight, and I quote, it's being slowly wiped out anyway. And time spent bringing it back could have been spent on introducing the new freedom fighters instead of overwriting them and bringing back the old versions for no reason. That's what basically he has to say about number 8. I don't think I can say any more than that. Except what are you going to do? And this is in the final number 9, the final highlight is this. Sally's butchering / gutting, weaponization and all that was done to give her a new outfit and appearance. His response to that number 9 highlight, confirmed by Ben Bates. Watch previous video. Now here's what he has to say towards the end of this, and I quote. This is what Vorak 295 has to say at the end of this. This is what he has to say, and I quote. So this is a hefty dose of quote-unquote called it. Flynn's writing has become more predictable and tired. I'm not taking any guesses at the next arc because it's Unleashed. We all know what happens in Unleashed. At the same time, he's written every issue of the main book since issue 160, and all but 8 universe issues, counting side stories. That's probably over 200 Sonic stories, whereas before the stories had different writers per issue. He's probably burnt himself out working for that long. Plus he's got the increased workload from Mega Man, New Crusaders, and apparently a webcomic. Impressive, yes, but not hard to see impressive, yes, but not hard to see why that might go wrong. None of the other writers worked for that long, mainly because Gallagher was too light and Penders and Bowlers went insane. But still, combined with Archie's paranoia about other writers suing them after the Penders thing, except for the fact that Penders was a perennial small name, big ego who expressed this sort of view a lot and the other writers aren't, leading to the nixing of the continuity, which Flynn really needed a lot of time. Decisions like Fiona apparently being Penders, except she's actually Gallagher's, the questionable internal affairs, Sega tightening the grip, and the fact that he's dealing with the unpleasable Sonic fanbase. I generally feel sorry for the man, but I think it's time for a new writer. I generally feel sorry for the man, but I think it's time a new writer was brought in. If he doesn't get removed from the back, then he needs someone to share the work with. It didn't work for Penders and Bowlers because Penders hated Bowlers' work and refused to acknowledge his characters. And Bowlers had too many radical ideas that wouldn't pan out well. Like Sonic Mina, Jerk-Ass Antoine, ending the Antoine Bunny pairing before it got off the ground for no reason, and Sonic and Bunny. But Flynn is better as a person, regardless of the silver tongue debate. And if he were to get along with the other writer, and they weren't too different in style, then it would be a bit of a boon. Okay. Now, I don't think any of us could argue about, some of us could, some of us can't, but some of us I don't think can really argue about the fact that some of the predictions, some of those top 9 highlights of predictions that came true that Vorak 295 pointed out did not become a reality in some way. But on the other hand, when you take a look at Ian Flynn and what he points out about him towards the end of this, I think it is understandable that Ian Flynn might be burnt out. That physically and mentally, he's just ready to hand over the reins to someone else, or at least take a vacation and say, you, new guy, you're going to take over. But you see, here's the problem, though, I think, that maybe Ian Flynn has with that perspective. I'm sure Ian Flynn knows this and agrees with what someone like Vorak 295 would say about him possibly being burnt out. I'm pretty sure he knows that. I'm pretty sure his family has pointed that out to him. His friends and family, I should say. But here's the problem, though, about Ian Flynn. You see, he's the kind of guy, he's the kind of writer, if you will, that, well, he wouldn't mind probably handing over the reins or sharing the workload with another writer. But I think what it is after seeing what happened in the past with, as Vorak 295 points out, with the likes of Penners and Bowlers, I think he's kind of not too much in a hurry to want to do that, because perhaps this new writer, whoever it may be, might want to do things that he may not agree with. I'll give you a comic book. I'll give you a historic comic book example. Stan Lee mentioned this in several interviews. As a matter of fact, he mentions it in an interview he does with he did with Kevin Smith back in 2002. This is what Stan Lee said, and I quote, and I'm trying to paraphrase or quote what he said. He basically said that, now he says he doesn't really remember, but from what I could tell, it's almost like he may or may not have been all right with it. But basically he said he went on vacation, and that apparently someone had mentioned that he had given them the permission to kill off Gwen Stacy. And that when he came back, whether or not he had given the permission or not, he basically said, he basically has the question of, what are you doing? People are going to think we have an agenda against the Stacy family. So, yeah. Basically, Gwen Stacy dying probably originally was not going to happen had Stan Lee really had been in the know-how about what he was saying yes to. And you see, I know that's kind of a odd example, but in a way, think about, think about it now. Basically, use that logic, use that thought, or basically put that logic and thought that I just said there, and put it in place of Ian Flynn. You see, Ian Flynn basically is somebody that doesn't want to have to come back and see something has happened and wonder why it happened. True, he doesn't have no real say in it because he's just a writer, but if he's sharing the workload with somebody, he doesn't want to have to come back and find out that somebody, let's say, killed off Bunny Rabbit. He'll wonder, why'd you kill her off? See what I'm saying? He doesn't want that. I don't think Ian Flynn doesn't want that to happen. Again, I'm sure he understands and respects what Vorak 295 says at the end, that perhaps physically and mentally he's burnt out. And one can't blame him. He probably knows that himself, Ian Flynn does. But like I said, I don't think he's too much in a hurry, because he probably doesn't want somebody that's going to come in and basically ruin what he started. Well, not ruin, but really change things for probably the worse. Again, going back to what I just said, he doesn't want to have to come back and wonder why Bunny died at the end of a certain story arc, or why Antoine died, or heck, even why Nicole got destroyed. he doesn't want to have to come back and ask that new writer why he did that. He wants someone that's going to share ideas with him, going to bounce ideas off each other. And that even if he's on vacation, let's say he gets an email or a call and says, hey, I got this idea. You think it's okay? At least he can give some input to it and suggest certain things, but not physically or mentally be doing anything. You get what I'm saying? I think that's what Ian Flynn would rather have, someone he can bounce ideas off of, that even if he does take a sabbatical, he could tell us that, hey, the comic is in good hands, don't worry about anything. The characters are in good hands, don't worry about anything. So, but again, I think that's why he's not too much in a hurry to either step down and let a new, fresh face come on board, or he's ready to share that workload with anybody. It's kind of like with, as crazy as it sounds, it's kind of like with WWE. Right now, a lot of people are getting sick and tired of the same stuff being thrown down their throats week in, week out, month in, month out, night in, night out. And that last night was a good example of saying, hey, look, you give us what we want, and we'll leave you the fuck alone. Excuse my language, Lord. But it's like, you give us what we want, we'll leave you the blank alone. So, again, that's just an example. That's just an example. It's basically like last night with that whole Occupy Raw Yes movement deal. It was basically Daniel Bryan and the fans saying, hey, look, enough's enough. Take a break from the same old matches, the same old rivalries and all that, and give the people what they want. Give them something new, something fresh. So, to me, I think, honestly, that's what needs to be done. That, yes, he does need to share the workload with somebody, and that maybe it is time for a new writer to step in and take over for certain books that he's working on, if not for the Sonic book. But again, just like the WWE refuses at times to listen to the fans and say, okay, we're going to give you something new and fresh. They stick with the same old, because they know in their minds that the only people they can trust are those that have been there for the longest time. Basically, the only people they know they could trust, besides the likes of a John Cena, and a Randy Orton, the only people they can really trust is themselves. They can't trust anybody. Is themselves and those individuals. They can't trust anybody like, say, it's Daniel Bryan or CM Punk or anybody else to carry the company, because they're afraid that person, once their contract is up, will say, adios, I'm going to Ring of Honor, or adios, I'm going to TNA, or I'm going to CZW, or I'm going over to Japan. They can't trust those individuals. They can't, in their minds, they can't really trust those people unless those people become dedicated and accept that things have to be a certain way. And that's the same thing with Ian Flynn. Ian Flynn, he's willing to share the workload. He's probably willing to pass off some books and everything so the workload isn't too bad to another writer, or even share the workload with another writer. But until I'm pretty sure he can be paired with somebody he knows isn't going to screw the pooch, if you will, isn't going to mess things up. And as I said earlier, do something similar. Well, not something similar, but do something in the sense that, like Stan Lee, when he came back from his vacation, he asked his writing staff, why'd you kill Gwen Stacy? People are going to think we have something against the Stacy family. He doesn't want to have to come back and ask somebody, well, why'd you kill Nicole? Or why'd you kill Bunny? Or why'd you kill Antoine? Why'd you kill Rotor? Why'd you kill Uncle Chuck? Why'd you kill Sally? He's not going to want to come back and wonder why that person did that. He's going to want to go on a sabbatical, a mental and physical break, knowing that the comic is in good hands. And so I can understand where Vorak 295 is coming from that area, and I'm sure Ian Flynn does too. But but basically, this is all the predictions that, as Vorak 295 points out, came true in the Sonic comic over the past 3 years. But again, I think the most significant is towards the end, when he pretty much feels that maybe what's going on is the reason for all this happening is maybe because Ian Flynn is physically and mentally burnt out, and that he's not sharing, and that he needs to either share the workload or step aside and give it to a new writer, or at least give some of the titles to a new writer to work on, so he's not pressured as much. So that's all I'm going to say on it. I'll provide a link down below so you guys can read it yourself. And I will talk to you later. I am out, and I'm about to get ready for work. God bless. Take care. Comments are welcome.